The salty air of Port Sable clung to my skin as I watched my father laugh. His chest puffed out like he was the one graduating. He told the woman next to him that I was just there to hold purses. I fingered the heavy coin in my pocket. He thought this ceremony was his stage, but he had no idea I had already written the final act. My name is Mara Whitaker, and at 34 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible in plain sight. The mid-morning sun hammered down on the concrete parade deck of Port Sable, Florida, bleaching the world into blinding shades of white and gray. The air tasted of salt spray and aviation fuel. A military band was playing a march somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic thud of the drums vibrating through the soles of my shoes. But the sound was almost drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Thousands of families had gathered here, a sea of Sunday bests and proud faces, waiting to see their sons and brothers pinned with the trident. I walked toward Section D, clutching my purse against my side, and I smelled the trouble before I even saw them. The Whitaker clan was impossible to miss. They stood in a tight cluster near the front barriers, occupying more space than they had been allotted. My father, Gordon, was already holding court. He wore his navy blazer, the one he bought specifically for today, and he was laughing too loudly, his chest puffed out like a rooster greeting the dawn. It was a performance. It was always a performance with him. My mother, Lydia, stood just behind his right shoulder. She was scanning the crowd with frantic, bird-like movements. When her eyes finally locked onto me, her expression did not soften with maternal warmth. Instead, it sharpened. She looked at me the way a general looks at a logistics officer who is late with the supplies. She was calculating what she could hand off to me, her purse, her program, or perhaps the task of fetching water so she could focus on beaming at the cameras. The crowd surged with a collective cheer as the formation of graduates began to march onto the field. My brother, Ethan, was out there. He had survived the freezing water, the sleep deprivation, and the mental torture of training. I felt a swell of pride for him, but I kept it locked behind a neutral mask. I knew the script for today. Today was Ethan's day, which meant it was Gordon's day to harvest the glory. I was just the extra in the background, the one expected to clap politely and disappear when the official photos were taken. I reached them, and Gordon turned. He did not smile. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my simple dress with blatant disapproval. He stepped close, invading my personal space, his voice dropping to a hiss that only I could hear. "Stand back. Mara," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the overcrowded standing area behind the bleachers. "Don't stand there looking like a distraction. Don't make this about you. Stand back and don't steal Ethan's spotlight." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on me immediately, pivoting to a man standing next to him. "My boy is in the front row." Gordon boomed, his voice dripping with false modesty. "Built him tough. Takes after the old man." My phone buzzed against my thigh. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the glare of the sun. It was a single text message from the contact saved as J. Rook, in position. "Wait for signal." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked up. My gaze traveled over the heads of the spectators, past the cordon of enlisted sailors, up to the VIP reviewing stand. It was draped in red, white, and blue bunting. Standing next to the base commander was a man with a rigid posture and stars on his collar. He was a brigadier general, a man whose face I knew better than my own father's. He was not watching the parade. He was looking directly at me. Our eyes met. He held my gaze for 2 seconds, an eternity in a setting like this, and gave the slightest nod. My hand curled into a fist inside my pocket, the metal edges of the small insignia I carried digging into my palm. It was a grounding pain. For years, I had played the role Gordon wrote for me, the failure, the paper pusher, the disappointment, but the script was about to change. "Today, I do not come to endure," I thought, the words ringing clearly in my mind. "I come to finish." I did not retreat to the standing area as Gordon had commanded. Instead, I walked past him. I ignored my mother's sharp intake of breath as I stepped over the rope marking the reserved seating for immediate family. There was an empty chair in the front row, right next to where Gordon had staked his claim. I sat down, smoothed my skirt, and stared straight ahead at the empty parade ground. I could feel Gordon's rage radiating off him like heat from a furnace. But for the first time in my life, I did not care. I had just taken my seat at the table, sitting in that plastic chair, feeling the heat radiate off the asphalt. I let my mind drift backward. It was a defense mechanism. The present moment was too loud, too bright, and filled with the suffocating weight of my father's ego. So I retreated into the past, flipping through the mental file cabinet where I stored the evidence of my life. Growing up in the Whitaker household was a lesson in simple economics. Love was a commodity, and the supply was artificially limited. Ethan was the luxury good. He was the golden boy, the athlete, the one whose scraped knees were tragedies and whose touchdowns were miracles. I was the utility. I was the running water and the electricity essential, expected, and only noticed when I stopped working. I remembered a dinner from 3 years ago. I had just been promoted. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to say that I was leading a team of 12 analysts. But before I could open my mouth, Gordon slammed his hand on the table, beaming. Ethan made squad leader. He announced, "That is leadership. That is real power." I had swallowed my news along with my cold potatoes when I later mentioned I had a new title. Gordon waved a fork at me dismissively. "Paper pushers always have fancy titles." "Mara," he said, not even looking at me. "It makes you feel important while the real work gets done by men with mud on their boots." I never corrected him. In fact, I actively fed the lie. I let them believe I worked for a mid-level insurance firm, processing claims and filing invoices. I painted my life in shades of beige. I told them my days were filled with spreadsheets and coffee breaks. It was a necessary camouflage. If Gordon knew what I actually did, if he knew the clearance level on my badge or the name of the agency that signed my paychecks, he wouldn't be proud. He would be opportunistic. He would see me as a resource to be mined, a connection to be exploited. My mother, Lydia, was different. She didn't attack. She eroded. She was the water to Dad's stone. Her weapon was a soft, weaponized incompetence. "You are just so capable, Mara," she would say, usually while sliding a bill across the counter toward me. "Your father is so stressed with the business. You know how he gets. Can you handle this, just for now?" Just for now, that was the family motto. I thought about the file on my phone. I called it the Ledger. It started 5 years ago. It began with a plane ticket to San Diego so they could visit Ethan during his first phase of training. Then it was a rental car because Gordon refused to drive anything less than a luxury sedan. Then it was hotel rooms, dinners, emergency cash transfers because Dad forgot his wallet. "We will pay you back as soon as the bonus comes in." Mom had promised last Thanksgiving, her eyes wide and sincere. They never did. I wasn't keeping the list because I needed the money. I made more in a month than Gordon made in a year. I kept the list because I needed to see it in black and white. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a venture capitalist funding their fantasy life, and the return on investment was zero. Ethan wasn't malicious. That was the tragedy of it. He was just blind. He was so blinded by the spotlight Gordon shined on him that he couldn't see the person standing in the shadows holding the power cord. "Thanks for handling the logistics, Mar," Ethan had said to me yesterday, hugging me briefly before running off to join his platoon. "You're the best." He thought it was logistics. He didn't know I had paid for the suit he was wearing at the reception dinner tonight. He didn't know I had covered the first-class upgrade Gordon demanded. Ethan was the statue, and I was the pedestal. I shifted in my seat, feeling the vibration of the marching band in my chest. They thought I was a clerk. They thought I spent my days entering data into harmless little boxes. They had no idea that the logistics firm I worked for was a cover for a specialized unit within the Department of Defense. They didn't know that my boring paperwork involved tracing illicit funding streams and auditing black budgets. I looked at my father's back. He was leaning forward, desperate to catch Ethan's eye as the graduates formed up. He looked so small to me now. He thought power was noise. He thought power was shouting orders and demanding attention. He didn't understand that real power is silent. Real power is the ability to cut off the supply line without anyone hearing the tap turn. I touched the phone in my pocket again. The ledger was about to be closed. I wasn't afraid of them knowing I was successful anymore. I was done hiding. The fear that they would use me was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. You can't use a weapon if you are standing on the wrong end of the barrel. The atmosphere in the waiting area was brittle, like a piece of glass just waiting for the right frequency to shatter it. We were surrounded by other families, a sea of anxious mothers adjusting ties and fathers checking watches, but the air around the Whitaker cluster felt thinner, harder to breathe. My mother, Lydia, detached herself from Gordon's side and sidled up to me. She hooked her arm through mine, a gesture that looked affectionate to an observer but felt like a shackle to me. She leaned in, her voice dropping to that sugary, conspiratorial whisper she used when she needed something. "You brought the card, right?" she asked, her eyes darting toward the VIP tent. "The limit is high enough. Your father wants to host a little toast at the hotel bar later, and you know how he gets when the bill comes. He forgets things." She didn't wait for an answer. She just patted my arm, assuming my compliance was as guaranteed as gravity. "It is just for the family." "Mara, don't be difficult." Before I could respond, Gordon turned around. He had been scanning the crowd, looking for someone more important to talk to. But failing that, he decided to turn his attention back to his favorite pastime, belittling me. "Don't bother explaining the schedule to her. Lydia," Gordon said, his voice booming slightly, ensuring the couple standing 5 feet away could hear him. She doesn't understand the military tempo. It is not like her 9-to-5 desk job." A woman standing nearby, holding a bouquet of roses wrapped in cellophane, smiled politely at me. "Oh, are you in the service too, dear?" she asked. I opened my mouth to speak, to perhaps mention that my work required a security clearance higher than anyone on this field, but Gordon cut across me like a serrated knife. Gordon laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Mara does paper pushing, files, receipts, that sort of thing. She is the safe one. We have one warrior and one spectator. I looked at him. A younger version of me would have flushed with shame. I would have stammered a correction or looked down at my shoes. But today, I just smiled. It was a thin, cold smile. I realized then that Gordon did not care about the truth. He did not want a successful daughter. He wanted a foil. He needed me to be small so he could feel tall. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I am just here to watch." Just then, the crowd parted slightly, and Ethan walked through. He looked exhausted but immaculate in his dress whites, the new insignia gleaming on his chest. He spotted us and his face softened. He took a step toward me, his eyes filled with a genuine, apologetic warmth. "Hey, Mar," Ethan started, reaching out a hand. I wanted to. He never finished the sentence. Gordon swooped in, physically interjecting himself between us. He threw a heavy arm around Ethan's shoulders, steering him away from me as if I were a contagious disease that might infect the family hero. "Come on, son," Gordon said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "There is a commander over there who needs to meet the man of the hour. Let's not waste time with the civilians." Ethan looked back at me, helpless, as Gordon dragged him toward the VIP section. I stood alone in their wake, the space around me suddenly empty. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was a long, insistent buzz. I looked down, another missed call from J. Rook, and then a text message popped up on the screen. "We have a problem." He is using Ethan's name to sign for things that don't belong to him. Documents are circulating. I stared at the screen, the noise of the crowd fading into a dull roar. My blood ran cold. This was no longer just about Gordon mooching free drinks or bullying me into paying for hotels. Using Ethan's name, falsifying documents. That was a felony. That was the kind of thing that didn't just embarrass a SEAL, it stripped him of his trident. I looked up at my father's back. He was laughing, clapping a stranger on the shoulder, basking in the stolen sunlight. He had no idea what he had done. He thought he was playing a game of prestige, but he was juggling live grenades. I put the phone away. My hands were not shaking. I felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. I wasn't here to save face anymore. I was here to perform a surgical extraction. Gordon wanted a stage fine. I would let him walk right into the spotlight, and I would be there when the trapdoor opened. The realization that my father was dangerous, not just annoying, had not hit me all at once. It had arrived in fragments over the last 3 months, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. While the band played a patriotic march on the parade deck, my mind flashed back to a Tuesday afternoon at my parents' house. I had dropped by to pick up some mail that had been sent there by mistake. On the kitchen counter, buried under a pile of catalogs, was a letter printed on thick, expensive linen paper. It was addressed to Gordon. Curiosity had gotten the better of me. I slid the letter out. It was a thank you note from a local business association thanking Gordon Whitaker for his insightful keynote speech on raising a warrior and detailing an honorarium payment of $500. My stomach had turned. $500. He was charging people to talk about a son who hadn't even graduated yet. I dug deeper. That night, I used the skills I had honed in my real job, the job they thought was clerical data entry, to look at the public records. It was worse than I thought. Gordon had set up a localized fundraising page. He called it the Future Defender Support Fund. The description was vague, implying the money went to equipment for Ethan's unit, but the bank account linked to it was Gordon's personal checking account. He was soliciting donations, negotiating discounts at local hardware stores, and even accepting free dinners from neighbors, all by leveraging Ethan's name. I had tried to stop it quietly. I remembered standing in the kitchen with my mother, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us. "Mom, this is fraud," I had said, holding up a printout of the fundraising page. If the Navy finds out Ethan is soliciting money, even if he doesn't know about it, they will kick him out. They don't play around with ethics. Lydia had not looked up from the sink. She kept scrubbing a plate that was already clean, her shoulders tight. "Your father is just proud," she had whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "He likes to feel involved. He isn't hurting anyone. Mara, people want to help. They want to be part of the story. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." "It's not nothing." "Mom," I had snapped, losing my patience. "He is selling access to Ethan. He is signing things." That was the terrifying part. I had found a sponsorship agreement for a local car dealership. At the bottom, next to Gordon's signature, was another signature. It read, Ethan Whitaker, but the loop on the W was wrong. It was too wide. It was Gordon's hand trying to mimic his son's penmanship. I had gone to a lawyer friend the next day, a specialist in civil litigation. He looked at the documents and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This is bad. Mara," he had told me, "if your brother profited from this, or if it looks like he authorized his father to act as his agent, he is liable. They could pull his clearance. They could charge him." That was when I called J. Rook. Rook was not just a contact in my phone. He was a senior officer I had worked with on a joint task force 2 years ago. He knew who I was. He knew what I could do. I met him in a quiet coffee shop far away from the base. I showed him everything. "I can fix this quietly. I had offered, desperation leaking into my voice. I can pay back the money. I can shut down the account. Rook had shaken his head slowly. No. If you bury it, it will rot. If Gordon thinks he got away with it, he will do it again. And next time the numbers will be bigger. You need to kill this. And you need to do it in a way that protects Ethan. How I asked? Exposure. Rook had said, his eyes hard. Gordon relies on the narrative. He relies on being the patriarch. You have to break the narrative in front of witnesses. Make it so public that Ethan is clearly the victim, not the accomplice. I stood there on the parade deck, feeling the weight of the thin envelope inside my purse. It contained printouts of the bank transfers, the fake signatures, and the emails where Gordon demanded higher speaking fees. It was a dossier of betrayal. I did not want to ruin my family. I did not want to be the villain. But as I watched Gordon laugh and point at the field, acting the part of the noble father, I knew I had no choice. I was not going to post this on social media. I was not going to scream at a dinner party. I was going to hand this envelope to the one person who could stop him, and I was going to do it while the world watched. Sorry, Dad, I thought, my resolve hardening into steel. But you don't get to sell my brother. The execution of a takedown requires the same precision as a controlled demolition. You do not just smash the support beams. You weaken them structurally until gravity does the rest. I sat in my stolen seat, my legs crossed at the ankles, checking the variables of the equation one last time. I had orchestrated my presence here with the kind of bureaucratic stealth that would have bored my father to tears. 2 weeks ago, I had flagged the guest list through the protocol office. I did not ask for a favor. I simply updated my security status in the system, linking my civilian cover to my actual clearance level. When the protocol officer saw my file, he had quietly added a +1 reserved seat in the VIP block, assuming I would be part of the official delegation. I hadn't taken that seat. I left it empty to unnerve the staff, but I used the credentials to bypass the outer perimeter checks without my family seeing my ID. I shifted my gaze to the reviewing stand. Brigadier General Jonah Keller was adjusting his microphone. To the crowd, he was a decorated commander. To me, he was the man who had signed off on my team's budget request 3 months ago. He knew exactly who I was. More importantly, he knew who Gordon Whitaker was pretending to be. I tapped a message to Jay. Rook, do not engage yet. Let him build the tower. Rook's reply was instantaneous. Copy. We are recording. My father was currently leaning over the railing, shaking hands with a man I recognized as a local car dealership owner. I watched Gordon's mouth move. He was selling. I could see the glint in his eye, the way he clapped the man on the shoulder. He was likely promising a photo op with Ethan in exchange for a discount on a new lease. Then came the variable I hadn't accounted for. My mother leaned in close to me, her perfume cloying in the heat. She was nervous, her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. Mara, she whispered, her voice tight. When this is over, if the people from the Rotary Club come over, just smile and nod. Okay. Don't mention your job. I turned to look at her. Why would the Rotary Club care about my job? Lydia hesitated. Her eyes darted to Gordon and then back to me. Well, your father told them. He told them the family is fully dedicated to Ethan's service. It helps with the contributions. We don't want them thinking we have extra income. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. I had assumed Lydia was a victim of Gordon's bullying, a passive observer who just wanted peace. But she wasn't. She knew about the contributions. She knew Gordon was pleading poverty to solicit donations from the community, and she was actively managing the narrative to keep the money flowing. She wasn't a hostage. She was the getaway driver. I felt the last vestige of guilt evaporate from my chest. It was replaced by a sterile, icy calm. I understand. Mom, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the reassurance she was looking for. I won't say a word about my income. She relaxed, mistaking my coldness for obedience. Good girl. We just need to get through today. Yes, I thought. We certainly do. I pulled my phone out one last time. I found Ethan's contact. My thumb hovered over the screen. He was somewhere out there on the field, standing in formation, thinking his biggest challenge today was not locking his knees. He had no idea the ground was about to open up beneath him. I needed him to know he wasn't falling alone. I typed a single line. No matter what happens in the next hour, keep your eyes forward. I am right here. I have your 6. I hit send. The drum roll started, a sharp cracking sound that cut through the murmur of the crowd. The families fell silent. The heavy thud of boots on pavement began to echo off the hangars. Gordon straightened his tie, putting on his mask of the proud, noble patriarch. Lydia wiped a tear from her eye, ready for her close-up. I closed my eyes for 1 second. I visualized the dossier in my purse. I visualized the look on General Keller's face when I briefed him yesterday. I visualized the dominoes standing in a perfect line. It is time. I whispered to no one. I opened my eyes and looked straight ahead. The show was about to begin, and I was the only one who knew the ending. The announcer asked the crowd to rise for the arrival of the official party, and the sound of 2,000 people standing up at once sounded like a sudden rush of wind. As I moved to stand, Gordon took a deliberate sidestep to the right. He placed his broad back directly in my line of sight, effectively walling me off from the parade ground. It was a petty physical assertion of dominance. He was reminding me that even here, in a stadium filled with strangers, my view of the world was permitted only through the gaps he allowed. I did not move to look around him. I stared at the back of his navy blazer, watching the fabric strain across his shoulders as he puffed his chest out. When the oath was finished and the caps were tossed, the order dissolved into organized chaos. The announcer invited families down to the field for the pinning ceremony. Gordon practically vaulted over the barrier, pulling Lydia with him. I followed at a distance, navigating the crush of bodies. I found them near the 50-yard line. Ethan was standing there, looking overwhelmed, shaking hands with his platoon mates. Gordon had his arm clamped around Ethan's neck in a chokehold that masqueraded as a hug. I raised him to be tough. Gordon was shouting to a man standing next to us, a father whose son was in the same squad. I drove him to practice every morning at 5. I am the one who got him here. It takes a strong hand to mold a warrior. He spotted me standing just outside the circle, his face twisted into a mask of impatience. Come on, Mara, hurry up, he barked, waving his hand dismissively. We need a family photo. Just stand on the edge. Don't crowd your brother. I stepped into the frame, placing my hand lightly on Ethan's shoulder. I felt the tension vibrating through his uniform. He was rigid. Smile. Everyone a volunteer photographer chirped. As the shutter clicked, Gordon pulled away and looked at me with a sneer that he didn't bother to hide from the other families. That is enough. Let the men talk now, Gordon said loudly. You wouldn't understand the debriefing anyway. It is not like filing tax returns. Is it a woman standing nearby, holding a crying baby? Gave a polite, awkward laugh. Oh, does your daughter work in accounting? Gordon laughed, a booming sound that grated on my nerves. Something like that. My daughter prefers the safety of a cubicle. She likes to be the boss of her little piles of paper rather than serve her country. Some have the spine for this life, and some, well, some just watch. I saw Ethan flinch. His eyes squeezed shut for a fraction of a second, and his jaw muscles bunched tight. He looked at me, his expression pleading, begging me not to make a scene, begging me to just absorb the blow like I always did. It was a deep, jagged cut. This was his moment of triumph, and Gordon was using it to publicly weigh my worth and find it wanting. Gordon saw that he had an audience now. A small circle of parents had turned to watch the loud man in the navy blazer. He fed off their attention, "She is the safe one," he announced, gesturing at me like I was a prop in a comedy routine. While Ethan was swimming with sharks, Mara was probably complaining that the office coffee was cold. That is the Whitaker balance. One hero, one outsider. The crowd chuckled nervously. They didn't know how to react to the cruelty, so they defaulted to polite amusement. I stood perfectly still. I did not argue. I did not defend my career or my choices. I just took a half step back, creating a physical gap between myself and my father. I breathed in the salt air, counting the seconds. "Let him speak," I told myself. Let him put every single word on the record. Gordon was beaming, his face flushed with the high of being the center of attention. He opened his mouth to deliver another punchline, another joke at my expense to elevate his own ego, but the laugh died in his throat. Behind him, the crowd noise seemed to dip. People were looking past Gordon's shoulder, their expressions shifting from amusement to respect. I saw Gordon's eyes widen as he noticed the change in the atmosphere. A figure had separated from the VIP group and was walking across the grass with a purposeful, measured stride. The sunlight caught the gleam of polished brass stars. The figure did not stop until the toes of his military-issue dress shoes were inches from my father's heels. Gordon was still smiling, oblivious to the shadow that had just fallen over him. He was about to turn around, expecting perhaps another admirer. He had no idea he was standing in the kill zone. Brigadier General Jonah Keller did not speak immediately. He looked at me first. His eyes were cold and assessing, ignoring the man in the navy blazer completely to focus solely on me. It was a deliberate breach of social protocol that signaled a shift in the hierarchy of the space. Then, he shifted his gaze to Gordon. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen in a jar. It was clinical, detached, and it stripped Gordon of every ounce of bluster he had accumulated over the last hour. Keller turned his body fully toward me. He ignored the confusion rippling through the small crowd. He snapped his heels together. The sound was sharp, a percussive crack that cut through the murmurs of the families and the distant sound of the wind coming off the ocean. He raised his right hand to the brim of his cover in a crisp, perfect salute. "Rear Admiral Whitaker," Keller said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. It was a tone that demanded silence, and it got it. The quiet that followed was heavy. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the immediate vicinity. The parents who had been chuckling at Gordon's jokes froze in place. Gordon stood there, his mouth slightly open, the smile dying a slow, agonizing death on his face. The color drained from his skin until he looked like gray ash. He looked from Keller to me, his brain trying to process a reality that refused to fit into his small, carefully constructed worldview. The term Rear Admiral hung in the air between us, a rank that outstripped not just my brother, but the general standing before me. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply straightened my spine, falling into the posture that was second nature to me, and returned the salute. It was slow and deliberate. As I lowered my hand, I held Gordon's gaze. My eyes sent a message louder than any shout. "You do not tell my story anymore. You do not define me. You do not know me." I saw my mother out of the corner of my eye. Her hand covered her mouth. She had known I had a secret, but she had miscalculated the scale. She had thought I was hiding a promotion or a small bonus. She had not realized I was hiding an entire life. The other parents, the ones who had been eager to be part of Gordon's circle just seconds ago, began to take small steps backward. They created a physical distance, treating Gordon like he was radioactive. They realized they had been laughing along with a man who was mocking a superior officer. Keller dropped his hand, but he did not step back. He spoke again, his tone respectful, almost deferential. "Thank you for being here today." "Ma'am," Keller said, his eyes locked on mine. Your presence means a great deal to the unit. We appreciate the oversight." Ethan turned his head. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. He looked at the stars on Keller's uniform, then at me, and I saw the pieces click into place. He realized that while he was training in the mud, I was not sitting in a cubicle. I was sitting at the table where his orders were written. He realized I had not been hiding from the family because I was weak. I had been hiding because I was protecting them. The look on his face was not fear. It was a sudden, crushing understanding that his sister had been the one holding the umbrella while he thought he was weathering the storm alone. Gordon tried to salvage the wreckage. He let out a strangled, high-pitched laugh, a desperate attempt to frame this as a misunderstanding. "Well, Gordon stammered, reaching out as if to touch Keller's arm, a familiar gesture he used to control conversations. "I didn't know we were role-playing. Surely this is a—" Keller did not say a word. He simply shifted his gaze back to Gordon. It was a look of profound disappointment. It was the look a man gives to something that has crawled out from under a rock. It was not angry. It was dismissive. It said, clearly and without words, that Gordon was no longer a person of consequence. Gordon's voice died instantly. He shrank into his blazer, suddenly looking very old and very small against the backdrop of the military base he had tried to claim as his own. The crowd was dispersing, but the silence around us felt deafening. The whispers of the other families were like static electricity, prickling against my skin. Gordon did not wait for the general to disappear completely before he grabbed my elbow. His grip was hard, painful, the desperate clutch of a man drowning in his own embarrassment. He dragged me away from the lingering parents toward the shadow of a grandstand support beam. "Did you do this to humiliate me?" Gordon hissed, his face inches from mine. "You set me up. You stood there and let me talk, just waiting to—" "To pull rank, is that it? You wanted to make your father look small." I pulled my arm free with a sharp jerk. I adjusted my jacket, smoothing the fabric where his fingers had dug in. "I did not do anything," I said, my voice low and even. "I just stopped covering for you." Lydia fluttered up to us, her face pale. She was looking around frantically, terrified that the neighbors might see the cracks in the porcelain dollhouse she had spent 30 years polishing. "Gordon, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not here. Let's go to the hotel. We can discuss this at home. People are watching." I looked at my mother. For years, I had pitied her. Now, I just felt tired. There is no home to go back to for this conversation. "Mom," I said, "you saw what was happening. You knew what he was doing. You chose silence a long time ago." "Don't talk to your mother like that," Gordon shouted. He raised a hand, not to strike, but to emphasize his outrage. "Dad, stop." The voice was new. It was not the deferential tone of a son seeking approval. It was the command of a soldier drawing a line. Ethan stepped between us. He was still wearing his dress whites, the medals on his chest catching the light, but he looked different. He looked older. Gordon blinked, stunned. He stared at Ethan as if his own reflection had just slapped him. "Excuse me. You are taking her side. After everything I did to get you here, I sacrificed everything for you." Gordon spun back to me, his eyes wild. He needed a villain, and he needed it to be me. "She lied to us." Ethan Gordon pointed a shaking finger at my face. "She pretended to be a secretary. She lied to this family for years. She is deceptive. She is unnatural. I did not flinch. I did not defend my career choices. I did not explain security clearances or the burden of classified work. That was a distraction, and I was done being distracted." I took a step forward, ignoring Gordon's finger, and looked him dead in the eye. "What did you sign using Ethan's name?" I asked. The question hung in the humid air like a guillotine blade. Gordon froze. It was a micro-reaction, a hesitation that lasted less than 2 seconds. But in the language of guilt, it was a confession. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to the left. He looked at the same time like a deer hearing the snap of a twig. Ethan saw it too. I watched the color drain from my brother's face. He looked from Gordon to me, and I saw the horrifying realization wash over him. He knew our father was a narcissist, but he had never believed he was a criminal. Until this exact second, Dad, Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What is she talking about?" Gordon tried to rally. "She is crazy. She is trying to ruin your day. I never—" "Stop lying," I cut him off. I turned my back on Gordon and faced my brother. I placed my hands on his shoulders, grounding him. "Ethan, listen to me. I have the bank records. I have the emails where he forged your signature on sponsorship agreements. He has been collecting money." Ethan looked sick. He looked like he had just taken a punch to the gut. "I have the proof," I told him, keeping my voice steady to keep him from panicking. "And I am going to handle it in a way that protects you. You are not going down for this." Gordon made a noise in the back of his throat, a sound of pure panic, but I did not look at him. The power had shifted. The general had saluted me, but that was just ceremony. This, protecting my brother from the man who claimed to own him, was the real duty. I guided Ethan toward the side of the administration building, finding a secluded alcove where the noise of the ceremony was reduced to a distant hum. The shade here was cool, a stark contrast to the scorching heat of the parade deck. I did not waste time with soft words. I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope that had been burning a hole in my pocket all morning. "Read the highlighted sections," I said, handing him the sheaf of papers. Ethan took them, his hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of graduation and the shock of the last 10 minutes. He scanned the first page. It was a copy of a letter sent to a local hardware chain soliciting funds for tactical equipment procurement on behalf of his training class. At the bottom was a signature that looked like his. But with the flamboyant loops of our father's handwriting, he asked for my social security number last Thanksgiving, Ethan said, his voice sounding hollow. He said it was for updating the beneficiary on his life insurance. He said he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He used it to open a joint account under your name without your consent, I explained, my tone clinical. He has been funneling donations into it. "If the Navy audits you, they will see $5,000 coming in from civilian contractors." "That looks like a bribe." "Ethan, that looks like selling influence." Just then, a shadow fell over us. Rook stepped into the alcove. He was not smiling. He was not the friend I met for coffee. He was the officer protecting the integrity of the service. "The issue is not just the money," Rook said, looking directly at my brother. "It is the liability. If this comes out through a third-party investigation, you are a co-conspirator. You lose your trident before you even sew it on." Ethan looked at me, panic rising in his eyes. "What do? I didn't know." "We self-report," Rook said simply. "You file a formal fraud complaint against the unauthorized use of your identity. You become the victim on the record, not the suspect." My phone buzzed again. It had been vibrating incessantly for the last 5 minutes. I glanced at the screen. It was Gordon. A stream of texts flooded in. "Don't destroy this family. You are jealous. Reporting this is betrayal. I did it for him." I did not reply. I unlocked my phone and dialed the number for the hotel where the reception was booked. "This is Mara Whitaker," I said into the receiver, my voice loud enough for Ethan to hear. "I am canceling the reservation for the Whitaker party in the grand ballroom. Yes, immediately, and authorize no further charges to the card on file." I hung up. I was cutting off the oxygen. Suddenly, Lydia rounded the corner. She was out of breath, her face streaked with mascara. She saw the papers in Ethan's hand and stopped short. She didn't look at the evidence. She looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression. "Mara, please," she begged, reaching out a hand. "Don't do this. He can fix it. He got overextended. He told me he would put the money back as soon as the speaking fees came in next month." I felt a cold sensation in my chest. I stared at my mother. "He told you. I asked." My voice barely a whisper. "You knew. You knew he was taking money in Ethan's name." Lydia flinched, realizing her mistake too late. I didn't know it was illegal. Mara, I just thought. He said it was a loan against Ethan's future earnings. He said it was standard. She had known. She wasn't an innocent bystander, she was the silent partner who kept the books. I looked at Ethan. His face had hardened into stone. The image of the loving, supportive mother had just shattered alongside the image of the noble father. "There is one more thing," I said, pulling the final document from the envelope. It was an email printout. "This is worse than the money." I showed them the email Gordon had sent to the 3 largest donors in Port Sable. In exchange for their contributions, he had promised them exclusive access to the new graduates. He had promised that Ethan and his team would attend a private dinner tonight at a donor's house to share classified stories. "He pimped out the unit," Ethan whispered, his face turning red with fury. "He sold access to my team. That is a security violation. He promised something he couldn't deliver." I said, "And when those donors show up tonight expecting a show and you aren't there, they are going to ask for their money back. And Gordon doesn't have it." I put the papers back in the envelope. The time for discussion was over. "Rook, take us to the administration office." I said, "We are going to finish this in front of General Keller. We are going to put this on the record before Gordon can spin another lie." Ethan nodded. He didn't look back at our mother, who was sobbing quietly against the brick wall. He stepped next to me, and for the first time in our lives, we were walking in step, not as a golden child and a failure, but as allies going to war. The conference room inside the administration building was sterile, smelling faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a room designed for court-martials and strategy meetings, not family reunions. Brigadier General Keller sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his hands clasped over a file. I sat on his right. Ethan sat on his left. When the door opened, Gordon walked in. He had adjusted his tie and smoothed his hair. He walked with a bounce in his step, wearing a look of practiced annoyance, as if he were indulging us in some trivial misunderstanding. He still thought he could charm his way out of the room. He still thought he was the protagonist. "All right, let's get this over with," Gordon said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without being invited. "I have donors waiting at the hotel. We can't keep the moneymen waiting. Can we?" I did not speak. I simply placed the thick envelope on the table and slid it across the wood. It stopped inches from his hands. Gordon opened it. He pulled out the first sheet, the email where he promised a private meet and greet with the SEAL team in exchange for $10,000. He pulled out the second, a bank statement showing a withdrawal from the fund to pay for his car lease. "This is..." Gordon looked up, his face flushing. He turned immediately to Lydia, who was shrinking into a chair in the corner. "Lydia, I told you to handle the filing. You got the accounts mixed up again. She gets confused with the numbers." "Stop it," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. Gordon swiveled his head toward me, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, I see. This is your big moment, isn't it? The little paper pusher finally gets to feel powerful. You are enjoying this. You are trying to destroy this family because you are jealous of what Ethan accomplished. Mr. Whitaker," General Keller interrupted. His voice was like grinding stones. "This is not a family dispute. This is a federal inquiry into fraud and the misrepresentation of a service member. This is a matter of character. And right now, yours is entirely absent." Gordon shrank back, the air leaving his lungs. He looked at Ethan, desperate for an ally. "Ethan, son, tell them." Gordon pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Tell them I did it for you. I built your legacy. I made you a star in this town." Ethan stood up. He placed his hands flat on the table. He looked down at the man who had dominated his life for 24 years, and for the first time, he didn't see a father. He saw a parasite. "You didn't build a legacy, Dad," Ethan said, his voice shaking with a rage he had suppressed for a lifetime. "You built a billboard. You used me as a brand. You sold me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gordon looked around the room, his eyes darting from face to face. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. Then he tried to beg. I can pay it back." It was just a loan. Then, when he saw no mercy in our eyes, he slammed his fist on the table. "Ungrateful, both of you, after everything I sacrificed. And then, finally." He went silent. He slumped in his chair, a man who realized the audience had left the theater and the lights had been turned off. "Here is what is going to happen," General Keller said. Closing the file, "Rear Admiral Whitaker and her brother have agreed to a civil resolution to avoid a public court-martial that would stain the unit's reputation. You will return every cent. You will issue a written retraction to every donor stating that the fundraising was unauthorized. If you deviate from this by 1 inch, the JAG Corps will file charges before the sun goes down. Ethan is in the clear," Keller added, "looking at my brother, because he self-reported immediately. That is what integrity looks like." I stood up. I looked at Lydia. She was weeping into a tissue, looking at me with tragic, wet eyes, waiting for me to fix it, waiting for me to offer a loan or a lie to smooth things over. I felt a profound sense of detachment. I was not going to save her. She had made her choice every time she watched Gordon sign Ethan's name and said nothing. "Let's go." "Ethan," I said. We walked toward the heavy oak door. I didn't look back at Gordon. He was just a small man in a navy blazer, drowning in a room that was too big for him. As I reached for the handle, Keller spoke. "Rear Admiral." I paused and turned around. Keller was standing. He wasn't saluting this time. He was just nodding. It wasn't a recognition of the rank on my collar. It was a recognition of the action I had just taken. I had chosen honor over blood. "General," I replied with a nod. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the blinding Florida sun. The air was hot and thick, but for the first time in my life, I could breathe. Thanks so much for tuning in to this story. I would love to hear where you guys are listening from, so drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a win today.